This is Ken Edmondson. Welcome back to the Next Level Leadership Podcast. We typically, in talking about leaders and training, we are always talking about techniques and tools and better ways to do things, and that's important. Today, we're going to talk about an equally important part, which is the most significant thing we see going on in the modern day, if you will, leader, and that is, where does emotional intelligence play into that? What is this other piece of the journey we call integration, the journey to integration, which is getting leaders to understand who they are and why they feel the way they do. To me, one of the experts in that area is my partner, Shad, and so no better place to go than to talk to him about this topic. Welcome to this episode of the Next Level Leadership Podcast. You probably know we like to talk to subject matter experts, but today you're the subject matter expert, and I think that's a good thing. So let's talk. I want you to really share your journey, and in that there's a lot to hear there. Mm-hmm. So what got you here? What led you here? What experiences led you to be involved in this type of work where we're really working deep into companies, again, mid-market companies? What got you there?
Yeah. So I'll try not to make it too verbose of an answer, but part of it was my involvement in our family business. Right. So being in a mid-market company in a family business, 100 employees. I was the youngest of 8, 4 older brothers. It was a huge opportunity to really be developed and grow into some. I've told people I had a lot of responsibility before I was worthy of carrying it. So I got a lot of opportunity to to try and do a lot of things. So that was my exposure to business in particular, and seeing culture and seeing leadership and seeing all those things kind of fleshed out. So that was a very natural progression, growing up around that and hearing those conversations. And then the personal side of it, as I grew in leadership, I was very ambitious, so I wanted to prove myself to my older brothers and didn't want to be the run of the litter. So I was very motivated to work really hard, and that was kind of a hallmark of our business. Like we worked hard.
Yeah. Your dad started the business, and it grew as the boys came into the business. It was an intense, as many mid-market companies are,
right,
and especially when you add the family into it. So quite an environment that you started in.
Well, and it's a sales environment. Right. So we were, I was competing with the whole sales force and wanting to achieve, and you layer in the desire to please family and to please dad into that mix. So all I'm saying there is, one, I was learning a lot more than I knew I was learning. Like, I was just being exposed to all sorts of dynamics, working with manufacturers and vendors. When I started, I had a semester left in college, and I'd just gotten married full time. So I was
married
21.
Full time?
I was working full time, and it turns out I was married full time.
All right, good on both.
I got married, finished school, and then went to work full time. But I had worked in and around the business, most of my childhood. So I think the recipe for all of that, which is the other dynamic of the journey, is that I was working a lot. So, 60, it wasn't uncommon. We had an unofficial, the unofficial competition of who got there the earliest. If you'd get there by 7, it was like, hey, good afternoon, where you sleep in. So that notion of like being there early, staying late, the numbers that you produced, the numbers that your division produced, and how those compared, and were you growing year over year, and how was your sales? So that was just so baked into that environment. Which
now I do know they gave you the smallest, most. Probably the lowest contributor to the business, and you don't ignore this. I want you to talk about it. You grew that business to, if not the largest in the group, certainly a major contributor to it. So don't be too humble about that.
Yeah, the joke was that it was a division that they were talking about closing, and so they gave it to me. Now again, that was just some of our playful banter, but we did successfully grow that into one of the large divisions, and we did acquire one of our largest local competitors. So that was a whole nother experience of assimilating a competitor. Like, not only did we assimilate a new company, but assimilating a competitor. That was a great learning experience.
That's culture. Emerging those cultures is always.
Oh, and they were radically different.
Exactly. They
And
always
so,
are.
yeah, that would be a whole other podcast I'd have to go back and think about. So all that to say, it was this perfect environment for me to really become a workaholic in the sense that it was just the next level of accomplishment of what I was supposed to do and providing and leading and what I wanted to grow into and what I thought was essential for becoming a leader and becoming a man. And so that really set the stage for this next journey that I ended up going on, that I didn't know that's where I was headed, was this whole emotional intelligence space, even this idea of counseling. And so, I had made the decision, and you were in the midst of this wrestling. You heard me grappling with all this of when I felt like it was time for me to leave the family business, which was no small decision, no easy decision. And I changed my mind about 1,000 times over the course of 4 years of what to do, how to do it. It was just very, very stress-inducing and difficult and formative. As I was leaving the family business, we also had a couple of personal life experiences that many of us have had of miscarriage. So by that point, so I'd been in the family business for 10 years. By that point, we had 4 kids. We were expecting our 5th, had a very difficult miscarriage. Then we decided that we really wanted to adopt, and the short story of that is we had a little boy for 9 days, and his birth mom changed her mind, so we had to hand him back. Those 3 kind of circumstances of leaving the family business, having a difficult miscarriage, and then having the failed adoption are really what put me on my face. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, where my resources, looking back, realizing that my resources were extremely depleted emotionally. And those events basically left me, the bottom kind of fell out. And there's a lot more to that. But that's when we realized, I was depressed, didn't think that was possible. Didn't think I could, how could I ever, that's not something I would experience.
Yeah, depression is not always manifested in the way people see it, as in, we call it functional depression a lot of times. I'm telling people I'm okay, but I'm really not okay.
Yeah, and I had very much learned what we describe as that performance-based identity, where I could do the work and I could get it done and I could still function, but I was extremely hurting on the inside. And so that all kind of came to a head. And that's really where my journey in counseling personally, and I tell people I didn't go to counseling voluntarily. I feel like I got pushed in. I didn't really have a choice.
I think that happens a lot.
Yeah, kind of the shelf life of my performance-based identity had been reached. The extent of my willpower, had been exceeded, and so that's when I began the journey and went to see Tim Holler for the first time and got introduced to that work. That introduction to counseling, which was completely foreign to me at that time, and I really didn't. I could not tell you or remember anyone I had known that had been to counseling. So at that point in like 2012, there was still, and at least in our context, some stigma around that.
Yes. Yeah.
Some like, what's wrong with you? Why would you need that? Not wanting people to know. A lot of that's changed, I think, for the better now. But at the time, it was like this pretty shameful thing to need. So not something you really advertised or talk about. But when I got exposed to that and the care and the craft and the expertise of a counselor and what he was able to help me identify, name, heal from, understand, of how I related to myself, how I related to the world, how I related to God. It was just a very transformative experience. And then I know I'm this industry.
Well, you use a term often, and it's one of the 3 pillars of what we talk about. The things that we do have to be experientially proven. So your whole journey was part of that proven experience. You said something early in your comments that you were learning a lot of things you didn't know. Talk about what resources, what things, looking back now, and certainly there are years to come. We'll continue to learn. We should, but you now have a pretty strong library of experience and knowledge and understanding. What would you talk about that a little bit? What are those things?
Well, and then you could apply these in different contexts, specifically, or different applications for a relationship, but specifically in the realm of emotional health, wellness, and emotional intelligence. Counseling and psychology, understanding just getting exposure. So I got introduced to a guy named Jeff Schulte, and Jeff became a instrumental resource. And I think what I learned through that relationship and my counseling experience was the thing that I was most petrified about was that the more you knew about me, the more somebody else knew the truth about me, how afraid I was, how lonely I was, how incompetent I felt, how the traumas.
How normal you felt.
I didn't know that was normal.
Yeah.
But like the fear was that if I told you the truth about that, you would be like, okay, it's been good knowing you.
Yeah.
And what I learned through practicing.
Block that caller.
Yeah, exactly. What I learned in counseling with Tim, relationship with Jeff, and then practicing with other people is that the more I told the truth of my story, the more people actually leaned in versus turn and run away. And they would say, me too, I've had similar experience. I felt that before. I thought that before.
And I heard that as you and I talked about a lot of that over the years, because I'd had all these other experiences with all these other clients, and I knew this was pretty normal. You weren't as isolated as perhaps you thought you were, but it was not uncommon in the beginning to feel that way. But we'll take that a little bit now to the next step as what you've learned, what you've accomplished, what you've done, in all those areas. What part of that do you use now in working with leaders or of mid-market companies? How translate that into what you do now?
Yeah, I'll try to. So continuing that experience that I was having, where I was telling more of the truth, which I would describe that as like less ego, right? Because a lot of times for any of us in leadership positions, we'll use our position to prove our worth, right? So that's the ego. That's what we present to the world of what we think they need us to be in order to prove that we deserve the position. And so that ego or that false self, we all have one, but learning how to set that aside and recognizing when that's not serving us, when it's actually compromising the integrity of our leadership, because it's no longer about the mission, it's about my own identity. So I'm using the position of authority or leadership to prove that I have value and worth versus saying, whatever we've got to do to accomplish this mission, because that's priority, that's what we're going to focus on and that's what we're going to organize around. It's not about me. A lot of leaders will say, it's not about me, but everything everything we do is otherwise. So when we work with leaders, part of it is I'm hoping for them what I hope for myself. Like I want to be able to bring my energy in an optimal way for the longest period of time without having to succumb to some of those occupational hazards of the trade, sacrificing familial health and time, sacrificing physical, emotional health and well-being, sacrificing relationships, experiences. Those tend to be in the mid-market space things that we just say, it just comes with the territory. And I don't think it has to. So what we're doing is largely introducing leaders and giving them permission to join the human race. So and that's a lot of what I received was the permission to be human, permission to be limited, permission to have needs. A lot of us that are high performing and high achieving it feels weak to admit that I have needs. It feels weak to admit that I need a lunch break, that I need a vacation, that I need a friend, that I need to cry.
And within all that, you can still be very effective.
Yes.
And we'll use the term successful.
Yes. Well, that's why we say a lot of times we want this community to be for people who care about results and relationships.
Right.
Because I do think that's what people mistakenly will say. Right. And it's so much deeper than that too. It's like, what we don't recognize is how much we are using our anxiety as a source of fuel, and it's not a renewable resource. It's not clean energy. So, and we're afraid that if I stop being anxious, I'll no longer be productive or motivated. And it's like your values-based, relationship-oriented, missionally centered motivation and passion is a far cleaner fuel source than being driven by fear and anxiety. But that is that is one of the massive disconnects. I used to tell people, I'm not anxious, I'm just really passionate. It's like, no, you're scared to death. Like, it's like, you're scared to death. Just admit it. You're petrified. You're petrified of failing. You're petrified of looking dumb. You're petrified of being judged. You're petrified of saying the wrong thing.
It's almost like there is a uniform for every position, and as I move up, I've got to wear a bigger suit of armor because I'm now the head knight of, if you want to put it. So I'm going to ask you to go a place that.
I don't feel like I'm answering your questions, but I'm.
You are definitely answering your questions because I'm about to lead you there to get you to talk about that. You have applied what you've learned. Someone told me one time, I want to learn what everybody thinks I already know. And I thought that was a pretty insightful thing because we pretend to know a lot, particularly in the mid-market, where we say in the mid-market, we spend a year preparing for a leadership role that lasts 20 years, where in the enterprise companies, they spend 20 years selecting a leader who might go 5 years. All of that being said, you still take those experiences and take those opportunities that you've embraced, and you've built it into an offering that's really effective. And I'm glad you're talking about leaders because we all have those experiences where, boy, I hope nobody figures out, how scared I am.
Yeah.
What do you find? You've been out there now for a while, presenting that, working with leaders. What are you finding the emotional state of those leaders are, and how do you work with them?
Yeah. So one, we've built this together, and we could spend more time too on the process that you and I have been engaged in, which I've loved. But what I'm finding, and I would back up, I don't know if I'm backing up or going forward, but to introduce that of what I'm finding, I would talk about their relational state. I heard a podcast recently talking about how in the U.S. we focus on obesity and fat loss, and they were changing the conversation to say it should really be focused on building muscle. Like when you build muscle, you will reduce fat. But my point in that is people's emotional health will get better when their relational health is stronger. So we focus on emotional wellness, and that mental health has been a big, which it should be, it's important. But the predecessor to that is how secure are my relationships? Because you
say that again. That's really I like the transition you made from losing weight to building muscle, which I'm not able to do, but the other part I can do. Go back to that as your relational health improves.
There's a lot of emphasis on mental health, and we talk about people's mental health and well-being and where people are mentally, and that should be. But that's a little bit of the symptom of their relational health. And if you focused on strength of relationship, your mental health will improve. And there's just empirical evidence for that. The Surgeon General had come out not too long ago describing the loneliness pandemic, isolation that people feel. Leaders feel that acutely. So leaders, because you're carrying responsibilities that a lot of people can't relate to. Like you're carrying all of these,
it's
carrying
a lonely journey.
Yes, it can be.
Scary.
You're carrying, and so if you compound that or with that fear, people call it the imposter syndrome. It's just fear. You're just afraid of being judged. You're afraid of being perceived in a way you're not comfortable with. So you compound that idea where I've got all this responsibility and I'm supposed to appear or be perceived a particular way. Well, now you're stuck in performance mode. You're on a stage and you can't get off. And we're not made to live on a stage. So what I'm finding is, and this isn't unique to me, there's a lot of research around this. We'd interviewed Ben Holtberg not too long ago about the performance-based identity, where they looked at these elite Olympic athletes and how come some of them did really well after they retired and others didn't. one of the core dynamics there was that they had strong relational connections with other human beings that was not contingent upon their performance. And that's so huge. If you don't have relationships, and I'm talking to leaders, any leader or owner, if you do not have relationships outside of family and work where there is no contingency on your performance, meaning whether you do great in work and succeed and make a ton of money or you go bankrupt, that relationship does not change.
We need to do an entire podcast on that topic, because we may have leaders listening to saying, yeah, but people drain me. I'm introverted maybe, or after the end of the day, I don't have time for relationships. I don't even go home. And we hear that a lot. I'm not present at home. So this is not about changing your personality, I gather. It's not about you becoming more outgoing.
Nope.
It's really about you learning to understand who you are, as we say, see and know yourself.
And I think that's
Please.
a really important distinction.
Yeah.
You don't need 100 people. That's the interesting component of the culture we're in right now is through social media we have endless connections, but it's the perception of connection, but it's satiating, but it's not actually gratifying the legitimate need. So you don't need that many people to be in relationship with and to be known by. No matter whether you're introverted or extroverted, you may have more energy for more relationships, and that's great. But you have to have resources, relational resources, to meet legitimate needs in legitimate ways relationally.
Yeah.
And so we, leaders in particular, a lot of performance-based people spend a lot of energy and time trying to run away from that level of vulnerability, and it costs them dearly. And so, back to that question of what are we finding in the emotional state? We live in an age of chronic anxiety.
We do.
We're leading people with chronic anxiety. The antidote to chronic anxiety is relational connection in depth. There's nothing more soothing, comforting, calming, grounding than being in a relationship that doesn't demand that I produce or perform.
Yeah, I heard a term recently about actors. And and they're gonna have a fight, or it's a Western where somebody's gonna get in a fight, and they call it performance punching. The ability to look like you've really thrown a punch, but you didn't. How good is your performance punch?
Yeah.
And that really seems to relate to many of the leaders out there. They have a performance punch. They look like they're doing it, but they're really struggling.
And I would suspect, I'd be interested to talk to those actors, that performance punching is harder than punching for real.
Yeah.
That requires a whole nother level of skill to look like I'm hitting you and not really hit you.
Or if I do hit you, that's probably not a good idea.
So that's an interesting
we
illustration.
use in our vernacular, in our book, we talk about the journey. We talk about the leadership journey. It's not a pill, it's a path. It doesn't end. What we're trying to do is make that path more clear, light the way. But it's a bi-directional journey. There's what we call the journey out, which is where we talk about the tools and techniques and all the things that people are accustomed to talking about. What are the best tools and techniques? We call that the alignment, getting the right tools, keeping up, making the changes. The part that has been absolutely fascinating to me, and the thing that seems to be absolutely the greatest need and the deepest water out there is the what you've been talking about. We call it the journey in, integration. Can you share some thoughts about the leader's journey in, that journey to integration?
Yeah, and
it's a lot to cover. But
well, we can talk about this stuff all day. And the journey out, I don't know if you would call that management as much. I mean, there's management leadership in there, and the journey in is really the internal universe of the leader. We mix metaphors all the time between icebergs and pyramids and roots, but it's like it is the root system, it is the depth of the tree that supports the branches. So we tell leaders it's often that the more responsibility you carry at home, at work, in the community, the more you need, the more relational nutrients and nourishment you need. And so the journey in is really an invitation to that part of their humanity that is often neglected. It's this. So that we kind of talk about it as like it's paramount to the equator in the 15th century. It's like if you go past that point and you go down that well, you're never coming back. So we spend all this energy and time not realizing that there's a whole universe and hemisphere over there.
It's not a flat Earth?
It's not.
We're not going to fall off?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Good.
Yeah. So, but like this fear that if I tap into or connect with this emotional aspect of my being, you have been a master around the skills of emotional intelligence. So there's those two skills within the 5 realms of emotional intelligence, which we'll do another podcast on that. Emotional self-awareness, emotional self-expression, stress tolerance, interpersonal relationships.
Self-regard, self-narrative.
So these are all ways that we relate to ourselves that then express themselves to other people relationally. And so the journey in really, we could describe this so many ways, but it's helping guide us in a framework toward being more authentic and integrated. You're integrated, meaning your head, your hands, and your heart are all collaborating. You can't, and even personal and professional. You hear people say, well, it's not personal, it's business. Or I don't bring work home. It's like, I don't know how you manage that. Like, it's got to be integrated into the whole of my being, and that when I'm integrated, I'm actually able to live more courageously. I can more actively participate with the hope of my leadership. So hope is this picture of the future. I'm envisioning how things ought to be if it all works. And it takes a ton of courage because you're going to end up taking a lot of risk to lead that way. Mm-hmm. Like if I'm imagining, because if you can see it, it's not hope. Hope is this picture of the future you can't see, but you know is possible. Mm-hmm. That's what we lead toward. And so what we're advocating for leaders on the journey in is that there's an excavation process of unearthing the hope that's already in you. Because we tell them, we're not putting anything in you that's not already there. Right. We're trying to draw this out. Like there's something in you that needs to breathe. You've learned to suppress it, tamp it down, hide it, minimize it. And so that keeps us in performance mode. Mm-hmm. We're inviting you to bring it out and let that hope breathe and that flame kind of burn eternal, where you can lead in light of that. That's actually inspiring. Like that's actually something people want to follow. So there's a lot in the journey in. We have several components that we're introducing to help create leadership cohesion among your leadership team, to develop actual connection and community.
Yeah, so they can actually lead.
Right.
Yeah, which is a term we use so loosely. My leadership team, when in fact you've got a management team. Oftentimes it's not leading anything.
Yeah, if we're fighting fires, and that's what we talk about, the gravitational pull of operations or operational firefighting, that's management. It happens, it's necessary.
Right.
But if we're not actually moving toward hope, you're not actually moving toward a picture of the future that is more compelling than the present, and it's not a fantasy, it's an actual dream, then that's leadership. And so, it's
I'm not sure this is a question, but I feel compelled to put it in here. As you talk about the emotional intelligence and the need that leaders have today, and what has really created that over the last 15 years, this is not, we never talked about this in the 70s and 80s. I didn't. And no one else I knew did.
Well, you were too young then.
We just worked and we performed, and this was not. I mean, it's really been with the advancement of technology. We talk about that a lot. Why this need is there, and what is really co-opting that need. But here's the thought: you are the most balanced workaholic. Now I use that term because we always say, but you're still working hard and you still cover a lot of ground. There are two things that I've noticed in your advancement over the last 20 years, really. You're a natural connector. You have a natural ability to connect with people. You always have. It's genuine. And you're really, we've not coined this term yet. We probably should. What is the modern day version of a workaholic? Well, you're that. You are balanced. Everything gets a part of you, and you seem very balanced with all of that. So I don't know that's a question as much as it is just you're an example of all of this, but it's taken you years to really develop that. So,
yeah, I would say I'm in recovery, right? It's like an ongoing process, and it's never done, and it's bottomless. And I definitely have the proclivity to gravitate to performance and production and neglect some of my other needs or the needs of those around me that I love. And so I think what I continue to learn and realize is that when I stop working and I move toward relationship, or I carve out time toward recreation, we would intentionally use the word recreation as opposed to vacation, because there's no such thing as a way.
Yeah.
You recreate yourself so you can re-engage with.
But it's seamless with you.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, that
You're
all
kind.
flows together. So kind of bringing this thing to, at least for right now, just a little bit of a conclusion. How does this, we call it a framework that we've created for helping the modern day leader. How would you say that helps in the leaders of mid-market companies? How would you describe what we do helps them to navigate their role? I know that question is a book, but how we're doing it ourselves. It's got to be something we can back up, something we've done.
Right.
How do we take a leader and help them navigate through what we've just talked about?
Yeah, and I describe it. We describe it 100 different ways, but I think the one that I feel like resonates the most with me is that idea of how do we take as much guesswork out of their day-to-day life as possible with the proper tools, right? So if you've got good tools that measure the right things, you're not having to guess or use your intuition, and you talk about that a lot. And the less your energy you're wasting guessing, then the more energy you're going to have toward leading. And so what I love about what you've done, and I just still am fascinated by all the tools and resources that you have curated that we're continuing to organize and deliver to our clients, that is taking as much guesswork out of your hiring, out of your brand strategy, out of your finances, out of all those, out of your foundation and your culture. So that's short track, right? So that tool is intended to measure what can be reliably measured. Then the journey in is putting them in a framework that allows them to show up with the energy that's no longer driven primarily by fear, but it's invited or compelled or pulled by that hope, by that purpose. However you want to describe it, vision, mission, purpose. So now, if you have gotten really clear on your values, which is one of the big exercises every individual, I mean, until you had me do it, I had never done it before. And I don't know, the first time we did it was, I don't know when. To name your value, describe your value. What's the cost of that value? Because they all come with a cost.
They do.
And are you willing to pay it? Is it aspirational? Is it actual? So, I mean, it's so beautiful, because when you start to really intentionally orient your leadership around how you're wired from a traits perspective and a values perspective, because that's predictive. So you know kind of what direction you're going to go, and then what you're aiming for. Like, this is the highest value I feel like I could pursue, and so I'm going to keep pursuing it. I can't not pursue it. So
I love talking about that.
I know. That's another conversation that we got to have. So when you start piecing those things in, and it's a lifelong process. I mean, that's what you've...
It's a path.
Yes, it's a path.
You say.
Yeah, and Chip Dodd gets credit for that, the expression, it's a path, not a pill, because we all want a pill. I would much rather take a pill and it all work. And the reality is there's not one that you could take that doesn't simultaneously destroy you.
As we talk about, we want you to be the best you can be for the longest period of time. And that can be interpreted a lot of different ways. There's so much to unpack in all of that. So wrap that up a little bit now as we kind of close this section or this podcast. What if a leader is, and we say leader, positionally anyone who has a desire or actual role in a company where you are growing other people, if you want to call that simple definition of a leader. what would you ask them to think about first? What would you, how would you help them organize around what we've told them?
Well, I think a question I've picked up from you was like, you're probably going to be successful. I just don't know if you'll enjoy it.
Right.
Like my question for you as a leader right now is like, are you enjoying it? If the answer is no.
Do you like being you?
Yeah. Do you like, and if the answer is no, well then, could you will yourself to keep going? Probably for a while. Is it worth the price? I don't know. So part of the conversation I would want to have with anybody that finds themselves in a leadership position, but they're not enjoying it, and you could describe that a lot of different ways. Typically, it ends up sounding like I'm really stressed, I'm overwhelmed, I'm anxious, I'm not as present with my family as I want to be, the feedback I'm getting isn't positive. If any of those things fit, there's probably some reflection and reconnection that could take place through a process with us or someone else.
We've always began with that assessment process. Let's get a baseline.
Yep.
I do say to not all people, but to generally the ones we work with, that's how they arrived at where they arrived, is that they have a natural compulsion. They're wired to compete.
To lead and compete.
And that's... So we could predict you're probably going to continue to be at least advancing ahead of the pack. But where are the roadblocks? Where are the curves you're not going to make? And the baseline allows us to see where you are and what you're doing.
Yeah.
So.
Another conversation we need to have on this is just understanding that. Yeah. So where and also where are you relationally malnourished?
Yeah.
Because that going back to one of the other original points is, what is keeping me from having rich, deep, meaningful relationships? What parts of myself am I hiding from other human beings that's keeping me from enjoying the richness of that connection and the really the superpower or super fuel, jet fuel that comes from that? So
it's oftentimes not the situation or the job that people are challenged with. We can change jobs.
Right. We can change our physiology. That's what we do.
Yeah.
We'll move houses and sell our house and move neighborhoods to avoid having to have a hard or difficult conversation with a neighbor, and to reconcile. So we'll change jobs, we'll change environments. Sometimes that's necessary for certain, and other times it's...
Well, business is very much that way. The challenges are very common. The opportunities and the risk are generally very common. It's just, are you wired to do that? And that's what we tend to talk about a lot. So the journey in, the alignment has been a remarkable part that you've brought to our leadership community that we seem to never get enough of it. And I would say to someone who's listening to the podcast, if that doesn't resonate with you, that's fine. We have a whole nother section that we talk about tools and techniques, and we can do all that.
We won't force you there.
No. However, if any part of that they're listening to resonates, they probably ought to spend a little time with you to talk about how that might, and it doesn't matter what age they are. They can, we've got them, our age range doesn't seem to matter.
Yeah,
so,
because you're a relational, emotional.
Anything you want to add before we end?
No, just thank you. Thanks for making space for me to experiment and bring all this into it. It's been an absolute, I feel like we say that often when we're together, but it's an absolute blast to get to build off of and what you've been developing and creating over the years and participate in it. So,
well, you've certainly brought a lot of turbocharging to that, and that's been fun. That's been really good. But seeing these leaders, seeing these individuals, men and women, be able to grow, and then with that, as we used to say in another organization, lift as you go, they're able to bring people with them. And you and I talk about that a lot. If you get to the end and all you've got is what you've accomplished, and nobody's benefited from it, you're not gonna like where you are.
Right.
You want people to go with you. And if you're blessed to be in a position where you can grow other people and take other people with you, you got to know how to do that. But it starts with you, as you always say.
Well, and then that
It starts with the individual. You can't lead people where you've never been.
Well, and that's part of what Next Level existed to do, was to create a replicable framework, because in the mid-market space, you often don't have time to develop people in leadership behind you. And so even having a framework you can use to help train and develop others. But yeah.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you for joining us. If you've listened to all of this and got pieces and parts of it, then we're happy, because that's what we do this for, is to really give you things to think about and hopefully learn as we go through it. And we appreciate you listening.